Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is September 28th, 2025. I'm your host, Nate Pike. Boy, we have so much to talk about tonight. There's so much to get into, and there's some announcements and some other things. It's gonna be fun. But there's a lot to talk about. We're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with an ongoing conversation that's been happening here at the show for quite a while. And we do have it's turned into a much bigger project than initially anticipated it was going to be. And it turns out that it's an evolving project. I'm talking, of course, about coal mines in the eastern slopes. Particularly, there's one coal mine that has captured everybody's imagination and to some degree attention, although it's kind of dropped off over the last little while, what with all of the everything else going on in the province. So we're going to just take a quick sec to do a little bit of an update on the Northback mine. This is the Grassy Mountain mine that was the source of a great deal of controversy and a lot of concern because it does potentially have the risk or run the risk of contaminating the water supply for like literally all of southern Alberta, which is bad for ranchers, bad for agri-foods, bad for people. It's bad overall. And there's a lot of people who very, very strongly believe that Northback absolutely should not, and there should be no coal mining going on in the eastern slopes anywhere near the watershed. It looks like Northback is trying to revise their plans just a little bit. News story broke this week. Compliments of Emma Graney, who used to do Alberta Politics reporting. She used to do the most wonderful Twitter threads about the question period with gifts and everything. It was delightful. And then she went and started working on energy. And originally I was sad, but then she started writing about coal stuff. And that made me happy. So let's talk about this. To read from the story, the new Northback plan includes a new multi-tier water management strategy, which sounds very complicated and probably supposed to sound impressive, to try to avoid potential selenium contamination, reducing water consumption, and putting waste material back into the mine pit rather than Gold Creek, a huge point of contention in the original plan. And where it gets particularly interesting, and where this turns into, again, a little bit more of a nuanced conversation, it also shrinks the mine's footprint by around 40% and reduces the likely output of steelmaking coal from 2.5 million tons each year to 2.5 million tons each year from 4.5 million tons. So they're doing some things to try to protect, I'm going to read it again, avoid potential selenium contamination. Now, as we have had people on the show before, there's never not once been a coal mine that didn't have some kind of environmental contamination disaster, call it what you will, in the province of Alberta. So potential, certain, do with that what you will. But the other piece that gets to be important is they're shrinking the footprint by 40%. Now, one of the big pitches that Northback made to the communities and continues to make through its various outreach programs, whether it's having MLAs come along to announce lunch programs or paying for revitalized golf courses, was that, hey, there's going to be all these jobs. But you have to wonder, and it's not included in the story, what is the impact on all of those jobs if they're shrinking the overall footprint of the mine? Now, we've been talking about the deep dive that we've been working on for this since quite literally the summer. We are going to continue that. And the next piece is going to be coming out hopefully in the next couple of weeks, which is going to take a look at the history of coal mining in the province of Alberta. And it turns out it's simultaneously exactly what you would expect and also complicated, which is why it's taking a little while. But look for that coming to our Substack relatively soon. With that being said, we're going to get into the meatier issues because we got a couple of really big things that we got to talk about. The first one is the new plan by the province of Alberta to update driver's licenses. And there's a lot of pieces to this that are really quite complex. The first piece has to do with the fact that back in August, Smith announced, Premier Danielle Smith, uh, Danny, if you will, announced that Alberta healthcare numbers would be added to driver's licenses. And a lot of people went, that sounds good. But then she also made another announcement this week that made things a little bit more complicated.
This change means that when Albertans need to prove both their identity and their citizenship, they'll be able to do so with a single document. It's about reducing red tape, cutting down on paperwork, and making sure that government works for you, not the other way around. Programs like Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped, Alberta Student Aid, and the Persons with Developmental Disabilities program all require proof of citizenship. With this new marker, accessing these supports will be simpler and more secure.
So you see, the reason why they've decided to add your citizenship to your driver's license is so that if you are one of those comparatively small number of people that needs to access those very niche programs, you will already have proven your citizenship when you got your driver's license, because you still have to prove it when you get your driver's license. So in order for this to be a red tape reduction-y move, you would think that you would have to apply for more than one of these programs. It's very confusing, but don't worry, it's not just about those things.
Adding a Canadian citizenship marker is also about protecting our democracy. Election security is a vital concern in Canada. By adding citizenship information to Alberta's driver's licenses and ID cards, we're taking a proactive step toward ensuring that only eligible citizens cast ballots in our elections. This helps safeguard the integrity of our electoral process and strengthens trust in our democracy. I also want to be clear that non-citizens, such as permanent residents, that still qualify for Alberta's driver's licenses will not have any marker displayed.
Now, this is where there gets to be quite a bit to unpack, because one of the questions that we always have to ask whenever government does something is, what problem are we solving here? And the implication that this is about securing our elections suggests that there is currently a problem with non-citizens voting in elections that they're not qualified or allowed to vote in. And there's very little, statistically, we're talking about less than a rounding error for how many examples there have been of that occurring in Alberta over the last bunch of elections. It's just not a problem that really happens. But it is a talking point that we have seen used, particularly in the United States, around the idea of disenfranchising certain voter groups. And this is where it gets to be complicated, because not everybody has a driver's license. Not everybody has an ID card. And there is value, and we're going to talk about the Alberta healthcare stuff in just a minute here. There's a lot of value in saying, hey, we should have these things. That would be good for the people who can access them. But it also disenfranchises a boatload of people who maybe don't have those access cards. And if this is going to be the qualifying thing for elections, then it becomes even more problematic, because, as Danielle Smith says herself, people haven't historically had to prove citizenship when they are voting in elections. Typically, all they have to do is appear on the electors list and provide any form of ID.
Election integrity is that it's our constitution that says that you can only vote in provincial and federal elections if you're a Canadian citizen. And so we need to have some easy way of being able to prove that. No one ever makes you go to the polling booth and you have to pull out your birth certificate or you have to pull out your passport. And so let's make it nice and easy for people to be able to demonstrate that they're entitled to vote because they're Canadian. And that would be the third reason for it.
All right. Sometimes those people are forced to take that route with the passport at the voting stations.
No, I don't think they do. Like no one ever has to prove their citizenship.
If
No,
their
all
if
you
their
have is
name,
a driver's
if
license
their
and
name
a
doesn't correspond
utility
to,
bill.
if their name doesn't correspond, it's one of the forms. Put it that way.
Yeah,
it's one of the
but
ways of
I
ID.
don't think I've ever had to take my citizenship. But here's the point. I think what has happened is that it's just not enforced because there's no easy way to do it. And we just want to make sure that people have confidence in elections going forward. We know that there have been state actors who've tried to interfere in our elections, and we want to stop that. And so that's a third reason for it.
So again, there's a lot to unpack there. That was Danielle Smith on the September 20th, your province, your premier. And again, a lot to unpack there. The suggestion is it's just not enforced. Elections Alberta just isn't doing the work of making sure that people who are voting are citizens. It just hasn't been done. We've just been so willy-nilly with our elections. There's a lot of subtext that's going on in what Danielle Smith said there. But there's an even bigger piece. Two, arguably. The first one is just because Danielle Smith has never encountered a thing, apparently that means it doesn't exist. Because when the host pushed back and said, you know what, sometimes people do. They actually have to provide their passports if their name's a little bit different on the voter list than what is on their driver's license. They have to be able to have that other piece of identification potentially to prove that they are citizens. Danielle Smith, I don't think that happens. It does. And that's problematic when the Premier of Alberta is saying, hey, this is a thing that never ever happens. And she's making changes that are going to disenfranchise people from the process of voting. And it also eliminates, arguably, the process of vouching, which is an important process because sometimes people forget things. Sometimes people misplace things. Does that mean that they should not be allowed to vote in an election if they're otherwise authorized and available to vote in an election? No. All of these processes exist, and there's very little, if not no, evidence that there are problems with any of them. But as we see from Danny all the time, when she has a point that maybe got a little bit refuted, maybe there was a little bit of, I don't know if that's quite how that works. She ups the ante because her response to, well, okay, well, even if you do, it doesn't matter because there's these foreign countries that are trying to influence our elections and we have to guard against that. Let's be very, very clear. All of the evidence that exists that demonstrates that foreign countries have tried to influence our elections have not been by sending people to vote. It's been by weaponizing social media. It's been by weaponizing how people receive their information and presenting false information and misinformation. And one could probably, and maybe will, make the argument that if one was really concerned about the integrity of elections, one would be conducting that conversation from a place of what's actually happening, what's actually going on, what do we actually have to worry about, and not pontificating about things that aren't happening. But it's not just about the piece with the citizenship. She went back to the conversation about the Alberta healthcare numbers.
Lastly, as we announced several weeks ago, we will also be integrating Alberta healthcare numbers onto driver's licenses, also in late 2026. This will also provide additional security around healthcare numbers, as we have learned through our refocusing of the healthcare system that there are more than 500,000 healthcare numbers registered than there are people living in Alberta. 530,438 to be exact, based on second quarter 2025 population estimates.
Now, there's a couple of things that I really want to, I'm setting the stage here, put a little food on the plate, as it were. Danielle Smith says, we've learned in our refocusing, based on population numbers and based on the number of issued healthcare cards, we've discovered this new problem that exists with the Alberta healthcare cards. It's very alarming. And again, the rhetoric that gets used is very, very revealing.
You had mentioned that we have about 500,000 more health card numbers than we do have people living in Alberta. So who do those numbers belong to, and what's going to happen to those numbers once the health card numbers get added to the driver's license?
Let me just sort of reiterate the number. It's 530,438 based on the population estimates from 2025. And I guess we'll find out as we go along. I mean, that's one of the things that is a bit of a mystery to us is we don't think that there has been very good record keeping by Alberta Health Services in this regard. It's part of the reason why we're taking more of these roles back into government so that we can get a better line of sight on these things. And one of the integrated approaches that my ministers have had has been to try to get to the bottom of this issue. So is it people who have passed away and their numbers haven't been cancelled? Is it people who have moved to another jurisdiction and didn't register with their new jurisdiction? Is it people who have left the country but maintain their Alberta health card so they can come back for treatment? We don't know. Could be any of those things. And so we'll have a much better idea now that we're integrating the two, because it'll be pretty clear where the outliers are, and we'll be able to have more answers to the question. But we had to start with trying to get the data so that we could get to the bottom of it. I don't know if Minister has more to respond to on that.
No, I think you nailed it, Premier. This is the very reason why we have to do this initiative, because the way AHS was doing it previously just lacked security, it lacked controls. So we are going to, in the fall of 2026, we will now know who has Alberta healthcare cards, and there won't be 500,000 fake ones, which opens up the door for abuses. So.
Now, what Sun-Dried Tintin was trying to say there, I think, is fascinating, because Danielle Smith did her performative comms thing where she was asked, hey, what's going on with all those extra cards? Well, it could be people that moved away. It could be people that maybe died. It could be there's all sorts of completely reasonable, justifiable explanations. We need to figure it out. I love the pauses and the looks off to the side, though. That was my favorite part of that clip. And then we have the elder Tintin coming up to the microphone, Minister Dale Nally, and he says, it's 500,000 fake cards, which is, again, a little bit inflammatory. And they were absolutely asked, wait, you just said that there's probably a boatload of perfectly logical reasons, and you also said that there's 500,000 fake cards. What's going on?
About the health card numbers and the over 500,000 figure, the Premier said it like they're of unknown status, but Minister, you said earlier in this press conference that they were fake cards. I'm just wondering which it is. Like, are they unknown cards? Are they unknown status? Are they fake cards and people are accessing the health care system under fraudulent means? Like, I'm confused which one it is there.
Well, that's just it. When you lack security features and you lack integrity in the cards like we do now, you don't know. So the reality is we don't know, and that's why it's so imperative that we do this.
If the reality is that we don't know, you have to wonder why the most logical explanation that a person would jump to is, well, they must all 500,000 of them, they must all be fake. But I want to replay one of the earlier clips because we gotta address a minor little issue here.
You had mentioned that we have about 500,000 more health card numbers than we do have people living in Alberta. So who do those numbers belong to, and what's going to happen to those numbers once the health card numbers get added to the driver's license?
Let me just sort of reiterate the number. It's 530,438 based on the population estimates from 2025. And I guess we'll find out as we go along. I mean, that's one of the things that is a bit of a mystery to us is we don't think that there has been very good record keeping by Alberta Health Services in this regard. It's part of the reason why we're taking more of these roles back into government so that we can get a better line of sight on these things. And
so you see, the problem is Alberta Health Services. They didn't do very good record keeping. This is something that they discovered throughout the course of their healthcare disintegration, refocusing, potato. And it didn't take very long before a bunch of people went, whoa. Who's responsible for the record keeping on these things again? That seems like maybe it's not so much accurate. And the Alberta Medical Association actually issued, it is bonkers that we live in a province where the Alberta Medical Association has to fact check the Premier of Alberta when she shares false information, but here we are. Fact check up. Statements by Premier Smith and Minister Nally on September 15th that accuse Alberta Health Services of poor oversight and controls in relation to the Alberta Healthcare Insurance Plan cards are factually incorrect. They have the statements that both of those two folks said. The facts: AHS is not and has never been legally or operationally responsible for the Alberta Health Care Insurance Program, related cards or management or of eligibility or accountability for how many cards are in circulation. This is the responsibility of the government of Alberta, formerly Alberta Healthcare, and now presumably the Minister of Primary and Preventative Healthcare Services. And can I just say how much I love the fact that the AMA wasn't able to, this is how well the refocusing has gone. AMA wasn't able to say, this is the government department that is now responsible for it. Because as we've seen over and over and over again with this healthcare refocusing, nobody knows what's going on. So the AMA, in their fact check of the demonstrably false things that Dale Nally and Danny said, was presumably, this is the Ministry of Primary and Preventative Health Services. And then they cite the government's own website that says, hey, we're the ones that are responsible for all of this. But there's more. There's some more nuance that we have to get into because, as Danny said, right, they discovered the problem through the healthcare refocusing. This is a new problem. Except it's not quite as new as Danny would want people to believe. Since 1994, the department has controlled access to publicly funded health services in Alberta by issuing personal health card numbers to people lawfully entitled to be or remain in Canada who make their home and are ordinarily resident in Alberta, registrants. The department maintains a personal health number registration system, the registration system, to record health information and manage billing of health services. This is from a government document, by the way. Personal health numbers are unique numbers issued by the department to each eligible registrant. The registration system is designed so each registrant should only have one personal health number, and a health card is issued by the department to each registrant with a personal health number imprinted on it. This is by way of background. Health cards do not include photographs or addresses. Registrants may apply to the department for duplicate, joint custody, family purposes, or replacement health care cards in case of loss or accidental destruction. There's no cost to the registrant for duplicate or replacement health cards. Personal health numbers are issued for life and are not recycled when a registrant dies. Also, they are deactivated if a registrant leaves Alberta for longer than specified in the regulations and are reactivated when a registrant returns. So, it's possible that some of these explanations that Danielle Smith offered up initially make very good sense. Maybe people have moved. Maybe people have died. All of these things from the government document that I just read to you, and I got a couple more sections that I'm going to read as well. Those are perfectly reasonable. But again, it goes back to the how long is it really only just since the refocusing that we've discovered this problem? Well, let's go back to that government document. Since 1994, there have been 3,749,705 million personal health numbers assigned to people claiming eligibility as Alberta residents, and 5,853,241 health cards issued to the same people. Therefore, the government department, has issued over 2 million duplicate or replacement cards since 1994, 4,693,350 personal health numbers have been issued to non-Alberta residents. Only 16,334 of these are currently active. However, they have received 25,547 health cards. Therefore, the department has issued over 9,000 duplicate or replacement cards to non-Alberta residents with current access to health services. So again, the government is the one who is issuing and tracking all of these cards. But from the same government document, we have to ask the question: how long has this been known about? Is there concern? Law enforcement advised us that criminals use improperly obtained personal health numbers and health cards as foundation documents to obtain further identification and establish fictitious identities. By using these identities to commit criminal offenses such as unlawfully obtaining prescription narcotics, they may avoid arrest by changing identities frequently. So the government knows, it has known for some time, that healthcare cards can be used for all sorts of criminal purposes. But wait, there's more. In a 3-year period, 7 duplicate health cards for one personal health number were used for 330 visits to 37 healthcare providers in 7 geographically diverse communities. The frequency, location, and nature of the visits suggested that several people were using the health card to obtain services. 32,440 registrants received more than 5 duplicate or replacement health cards. Of these registrants, 506 were children under the age of 10. One adult registrant was issued 60 duplicate or replacement health cards. One apparently related group of 22 people was issued 900 by the government of Alberta, 982 duplicate or replacement health cards since 1994. Now, in the interests of full transparency, full disclosure, those numbers that I just read to you there from that government document, documenting that there are potential concerns with all of these things, they may be a little bit out of date, because as much as Danielle Smith told everybody in the press conference, we've only just discovered this problem since the health refocusing. See, the health refocusing has done some good things. All of those sections that I just read and put on the screen are from the Auditor General's report from, let me just double check the year here. Oh, yes, 2003 to 2004. The fact that there are surplus cards in existence and that some of them are likely used for a variety of different types of fraud it's been a known issue for literally decades. So for Danielle Smith to come up and try to give credit to the healthcare refocusing for identifying a problem that anybody who has been following any of these government things for any length of time would know about is a little bit disingenuous. And it's also important to realize that some of these issues were campaigned on very recently. And full disclosure, I have a little bit of a bias on this one, because we know that I don't like to talk about the runnings that I have done in various elections. But I own my mistakes, and I have no problem saying. In 2019, I ran for the Alberta Party. And in 2019, the Alberta Party actually had as one of their campaign planks the reality that, hey, we should really do something about these paper healthcare cards. We should really do something like getting those numbers on ID cards. The Alberta healthcare card should be on ID cards, and people can just get regular ID cards, and they'll have the pictures, and it will decrease fraud, and it will solve many of these problems that were identified by the Auditor General in 2003. How do I know this? Because I wrote the policy for the Alberta Party saying that this is a problem that should be addressed. It was campaigned on by the Alberta Party in 2019. So for Danielle Smith to claim that this is a brand new issue is not only unbelievably disingenuous, it's just false. But there's other pieces to this conversation around the citizenship that are really, really important to highlight.
What guardrails will the province put in place to ensure people don't face discrimination if someone sees on their driver's license that they are not a Canadian citizen?
Again, this is pure and simple about putting citizenship on driver's licenses to make it easier when applying for benefits or citizenship entitlements. There will be no discrimination. We will not be putting the status of a non-Canadian on there.
which is such a bizarre answer. We won't be putting the status of a non-Canadian on there. Everybody's going to know that if you're Canadian, you'll have the status on your driver's license, but we're not going to put it for non-citizens. So if you see a driver's license that doesn't have Canadian on it, then you'll know they're not Canadian citizens. And when you think about all of the different circumstances where you may be required to present photo ID to suggest that there will be no discrimination, nobody in any liquor store or weed store or being pulled over by the new provincial police force is going to look at that driver's license and go, oh, you're not a citizen. And that's not going to somehow color that interaction. And if this does go ahead, and this will be the only way for people to present their Alberta healthcare cards, to suggest in a healthcare system where there is a lot of discrimination that is documented to happen, to suggest that this isn't going to be another piece that's going to potentially fuel some of that discrimination is not only profound peak privilege, but it's just not true. And I would humbly suggest that if the old version, the wrinkly Tintin, took the time to speak to, I don't know, any of the ministers, any of the MLAs in his own caucus who aren't that white, they would probably be happy to say, oh no, discrimination happens all the time. It's a very real thing. And yes, there will be circumstances where this directly results in discrimination, but we're willing to pay that price. That would be the answer from, I assume, the ministers, because they're clearly endorsing this move. But to suggest that there will be no discrimination between citizens and non-citizens is just absolutely rank privileged bullshit. But there were some other topics that came up at the press conference as well.
Just regarding harm reduction supplies like needles and bubble pipes, we're hearing that they're no longer going to be supplied to outreach agencies that work with Calgarians suffering from addictions. Can you speak to whether harm reduction tools like this are still available then at AHS facilities, and where things are with the province's plan to shut down the safe consumption site here in Calgary? Are those negotiations still continuing with city officials?
Well, I'll tell you that we are moving towards shutting down safe consumption sites, especially when we have municipalities that have expressed a clear interest in doing so. We're in the process of doing that in Red Deer on the basis of council asking us to. We also, though, are making sure that we have other supports available. So we already have therapeutic living units within the corrections facility in Red Deer. We already have a recovery community that's been in operation for, I think, close to 2 years as a way of providing long-term support. And we're also building, a brand new regional hospital there as well. So we believe that we have to transition to provide support. I believe that the plan involves having mobile paramedic teams and mobile nursing teams in order to be able to provide things like naloxone in the event of overdose. So I think it's a matter of providing services a different way. For the specifics on the rumor that you're hearing, I would just I'd invite you to ask Rick Wilson, who is our Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, and he can maybe clarify what the policy will be.
I also understand, again, I apologize if I'm catching you flat-footed, but that the federal government has, at least until last March, provided the funding for those supplies, for those kind of harm reduction tools. I'm just wondering if this kind of thing could be contingent on whether that's included in an upcoming budget.
Well, I can tell you our approach in Alberta is to get people into recovery so that they don't need those types of services or those kinds of devices. And my view is that we should all share that same goal. I know that the harm reduction advocacy groups, they talk about doing harm reduction until such person is ready for treatment. And so we agree, let's get them into treatment faster. And so that's what we've been doing. We have 11 recovery communities that we're opening up. 4 of them are already in operation. We've got 4 therapeutic living units in the corrections facilities, and it's demonstrating success. So we're going to keep on doing that. But I think we should all want to get our loved ones off of drugs altogether so that they can get back on with repairing their lives.
Now, there's a lot to unpack here. And there's a lot to unpack here for a couple of different reasons. First of all, the reality that the UCP government is going to continue to pursue closing supervised consumption sites is really quite problematic. And the reason why it's problematic is because those facilities, few and far between though they are now, save lives, period. They save a lot of lives. And not only do they save lives, but they have a demonstrated evidence-based history of actually decreasing the amount of paraphernalia that is found in and about communities where they exist. There's been plenty of documentation that establishes that. The other piece that's really important here is how Danielle Smith demonstrates that she has an understanding of what harm reduction is about and then completely misrepresents it. Because she says, hey, I understand that the harm reduction folks, they're saying that they want to make sure that people are safe until they're at a place where they're able to accept recovery. That's why we need to get them into recovery faster, and we're building all of these facilities. And on its face, that sounds like a maybe reasonable answer, but it ignores the fact that when we're talking about the goals of harm reduction, it is to keep people as safe as possible and as alive as possible until they are at a place where they are able to pursue treatment. You can have all of the facilities that you want, but if somebody isn't in that place yet, it doesn't matter. It won't be successful. But Danny seems to think, and maybe this goes to with some of the campaigning that we've seen from certain candidates in certain municipal races, Danny seems to think that there's going to be some way to get people into treatment that maybe is not dependent on whether or not they're ready. Maybe there's going to be some way to leverage getting them into treatment, which won't be successful. And the evidence bears that out. But the other thing that's particularly telling about this whole exchange is Danny just reflects. And this is an important thing in understanding how Danielle Smith structures her responses to questions, because she doesn't know for sure about whether or not the pipes and the other harm reduction tools are going to still be available. That's why she kicked it to, you should really follow up with the Minister for Mental Health and Addictions. He'll be able to give you a much better answer to that. But I'm going to pontificate on the why we shouldn't be doing those things and why those harm reduction advocates, they don't know what they're talking about. But she starts it all off by answering the question in regards to safe consumption sites. Danielle Smith is embedded enough in this file to know, she should be, to know that they're not called safe consumption sites. They're called supervised consumption sites, because all of the supervised consumption sites acknowledge that when people come in and are using their own supply of street drugs, which is what happens at these sites, it's not safe. It's just less dangerous. And it's less dangerous because they're supervised. So if there is some sort of adverse reaction to whatever that person is using because they've gotten a hold of something that's part of the toxic supply, then that they will be able to get immediate medical care. That's the whole point of supervised consumption sites. But Danny didn't correct the reporter. And she didn't just not correct the reporter and decide to use the correct terminology. She used the terminology that had been used on her, because this is a whole big part of how Danielle Smith communicates with people. She takes whatever it is they're saying, and then she reflects it back and puts her own spin on it. And this is really important to understand when we see Danielle Smith answering questions from people. We're going to see it a little bit later on when we get to the segment that we're doing on the insurance thing. But there's one other clip that's very interesting that came out of the press conference.
Peter Guthrie is tweeting about a second cease and desist order regarding the name Progressive Conservative. Reasons for that?
Well, I challenge you to show me any jurisdiction that has 2 Conservative parties on the ballot, 2 Liberal parties on the ballot, or 2 New Democrat parties on the ballot. You can't just steal the name of an existing party and then try to use their reputation to further your own. I mean, I have no problem with anyone going out and creating a brand new party, but we have the Progressive Conservatives are a legacy party name for our party, and we will fight to protect it. We simply do not want to create the confusion because we know what will happen. We've watched what happened with Pierre's riding. Pierre's riding had something like 200 people on the ballot to try to derail it. If you allow one extra Conservative party, I can well imagine we'd have 50 Conservative parties on the ballot. And then it would create confusion. And I can tell you what happened in the by-election that Pierre Poilievre just went through. You had Jean-Pierre Kingsley, who was the former chief electoral officer, saying this is outrageous and we have to make sure that we protect the choice of voters so that they know exactly who they're voting for. And we're not going to allow anyone to muddy the waters on that. So we'll be defending the name.
Challenge accepted. 2019, the Freedom Conservative Party with the Derek Fildebrandt. There, I did it. 2 Conservative parties on the ballot. And they even ran in a lot of places too. Ran against some UCP candidates as well. So let's be clear, a little bit of a disingenuous answer. But what it speaks to more than anything is Danielle Smith's belief that we should only be in at most a 2-party system. There shouldn't be any other Conservative parties on the ballot. And again, we have Danielle Smith grossly misrepresenting reality because you referred to Pierre Poilievre's by-election where there were 200 candidates on the ballot. I don't know if she's saying that people shouldn't be allowed to run in elections, or if she's saying that people shouldn't be allowed to have Conservative on the name of the party that they're with when they're running on elections. But even if that's the case, one of the reasons why Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair have gone the route that they've gone with teaming up with the Alberta Party is because it's really, really hard to make a party. It's really hard to form a political party in the province of Alberta. There's very limited pathways. You take over an old one, which is sort of the Alberta Party's history. You form something together. You have a certain number of MLAs who sit in the legislature and they form the party inside of the legislature. You have to run a certain number of candidates in an election, or you have to gather a boatload of signatures. The notion that there would be 50 Conservative parties suggests that there are at least, I'm just going to do some back of the napkin math, 150 MLAs in the legislature who would form their own parties, or there are enough people to put together hundreds. And I mean, if we're talking about 50 parties, we're talking about millions of signatures being collected to form those parties. It's all ludicrous. It's a ridiculous statement that would never, ever happen. But since we're talking about the PCs, because Danny is very, very clear. Oh, no, we don't want anybody else running with the Conservative name. Show me another jurisdiction. Wonder why she's so upset. She's very, very protective, not just of the brand, but of the idea that there really only should be one Conservative party. Never mind the fact that there are, at this point, 2 Conservative MLAs, at least, who have decided that the UCP does not represent them and it does not represent their values. So the idea that conservatism is united in Alberta is demonstrably false. But we also got a little bit of a glimpse into why maybe Danielle Smith is so afraid of the idea of there being a progressive Conservative party. There was a new survey that was done by Cardinal Research, and they took a look at two fundamental questions. The first question was, if a provincial election were held tomorrow, which party would you vote for? This is with the current political landscape. And with the current political landscape, which is largely a two-party landscape, you see that for all voters, the UCP would walk away with 35% of the vote. The NDP would get 30% of the vote. The Republican Party of Alberta would get 9% of the vote. The Liberal Party would get 4%. The Alberta Party would get 4%. Undecided or 17%. When you take a look at decided voters, the UCP pick up 43% of the vote, which is another majority. But there was a second question. And it's that second question that really maybe starts to highlight why Danny is so afraid. If a provincial election were held tomorrow, which party would you vote for? But this one factors in a PC party running candidates in all of the constituencies. All of a sudden now, for all voters, the NDP are leading in the polls with 24%. The PCs are beating the UCP at 22%, and the UCP are only walking with 20%. The Republican Party of Alberta gets 10, and the Alberta Liberal Party goes down to 3. For decided voters, it's even more stark. The NDP get 30%, the PCs get 28%, and the UCP only get 25% of the vote. Now, this is huge because this would be a scenario where people actually got to choose which brand of conservatism represents their flavor of conservatism. Because let's be very, very clear. Many people have said the UCP, especially under Danielle Smith, it is not your grandparents' conservative party. Thomas Lukasik, who was deputy premier, have said this is not the PC party. There are a lot of older school conservatives who aren't into the type of social regression that Danielle Smith has made the defining characteristic of her party that would like another choice, please and thank you. So it starts to make a little bit of sense as to why Danielle Smith is going out of her way to do everything she can to bar a second conservative party, a second party with conservative in their name, even though the Wild Rose Conservative Party has made it, or not, sorry, the Freedom Conservative Party has made it very, very clear that under election law, it's totally legitimate to have the word conservative in your name. And it's also worth remembering that Elections Alberta did reserve the name Progressive Conservative for somebody. And that's what they're hoping to use. So all of this remains to be seen. There's been no decisions from Elections Alberta in regards to what name the rebranded Alberta Party will be able to use. But it's starting to become very, very clear why Danny is so very, very afraid of not Pete Guthrie, not Scott Sinclair, but a second conservative choice that is openly identified as conservative and maybe a little bit more of the compassionate conservative that Albertans are used to pre-UCP. Moving on from there, we got to talk about teachers because there's some things that are going on in the province of Alberta right now that are pretty significant when it comes to the teacher stuff. And to set the stage properly, we got to go back just a little bit, all the way to September 24th. That's how fast politics moves in this province now, where a media release announced that the Alberta Teachers Association made an offer to the Teachers Employer Bargaining Association, which is the organization that by proxy negotiates on behalf of the government. Both parties have agreed to form a tentative agreement based on shared priorities, and members will vote on the tentative agreement in the upcoming days. I'm not going to read the whole thing because the rest of it is very much just and we are so awesome. But basically, on September 24th, it was announced that the government had come and the ATA had come together and they said, "Hey, can we get a deal?" And the government said, "Here's what we'll offer you." And the ATA said, "We'll take it to our membership." And the voting for this started yesterday, 8 a.m. Saturday until 5 p.m. Monday, which is tomorrow. The claim that was made on the 24th is that this proposal addresses salary and classroom complexity issues, except it doesn't really. Now, the offer hasn't been made public, so Nobody really knows except for the teachers that are looking at it themselves. But from all accounts, it sounds like it's the exact same offer that was produced in the spring. There's no significant changes, and it does absolutely nothing to address the classroom complexity issues. Because again, the fundamental problem that exists is you can add as many teachers as you like, but if you don't adjust the funding per student, if you don't make it so that Alberta is no longer the lowest funded per student province in the country, then inevitably you're just going to see the problem spread out a little bit, but the problem doesn't go away. This is what teachers are voting on. But what's really interesting about all of this is as this is occurring, there's another piece that's happening. And it's an important piece to keep in mind. Because one of the other things that has been talked about in the teacher strike is the fact that for many years, teachers took little tiny, like 0.5% increases, which doesn't keep up with inflation. Or there were a couple years where they took absolutely no increases whatsoever. And this is not great for a whole lot of different reasons, because cost of living has gone up. If we take a look at just the average Alberta premium from 2019 to 2023, it has gone significantly up. And where this gets to be particularly bonkers is how the government decided to address this issue. There was a rate cap that was put in place, which is to say insurance companies could not raise insurance more than a certain percentage every year. Now, that rate cap was 7.5% for good drivers. On September 24th, it was a very busy day, September 24th, the government announced that they are, great news, they're extending the rate cap for 2026. And this is where it gets bonkers, because the press release is written as if this is a really great thing. Alberta continues to make good driving more affordable for Albertans by extending the good driver rate cap for another year. Alberta's government is committed to helping drivers manage their rising insurance premiums. Albertans will continue to benefit from the good driver rate cap in 2026 as government advances a new first care auto insurance system set for 2027. Drivers in Alberta with a good driving record will continue to benefit from a 7.5% rate cap when their policies come forward for renewal in 2025 and through 2026. Here's what the requirements are for good drivers. Drivers must meet updated criteria to remain eligible for the rate cap, including having no at-fault accidents in the past 6 years, no criminal code traffic convictions in the past 4 years, no major traffic convictions in the past 3 years, no minor traffic convictions in the past 3 years. So it's kind of limited who gets to benefit from only 7.5% increase to their car insurance. If you're not eligible because maybe you got a minor traffic conviction 2 years ago, maybe you got a ticket for blowing a red light and you pled guilty, it's not 7.5% for you. Sky's the limit. But where this gets to be particularly galling is this is over 1 year. So while teachers are looking at best, with the current offer, 3%, assuming that the rumors are true that it was 3% each year, teachers are looking at a 3% raise over 1 year. Insurance companies are looking at least a 7.5% raise over 1 year. Both of these things are entirely within the government's control. But the government has decided, we're going to give the insurance companies a little bit more. And that really speaks to priorities. But where it really becomes abundantly clear what the priorities are is Danielle Smith on September 6th on Your Province, Your Premier.
We have a 17-year-old son who, I guess statistically, is at a higher risk and everything else. I guess we live on the border city, so we can look at Saskatchewan rates, which are astronomically lower, and it is specific to the person driving the vehicle versus the vehicles themselves. I would like to know if, I guess anything can be done to kind of switch up how it is, because right now we phone numerous insurance companies and you get different rates from different insurance companies. And with that, with all the immigrants who are coming in, are they placed in the same bracket, I guess, because they're brand new to the country, we have inclement weather that they're maybe not used to, or do they fall in the bracket of being over the age of 25 and their rates are reduced?
We have a private insurance market in Alberta that has caused a lot of frustration, and it was recommended to us that we, in one of the reports that we received, to look at a public insurer. And when you do that, you have to remember, then you're switching any risk of overages to taxpayers. So we had to consider that. It would cost several $billion for us to set up a brand new Crown corporation, and we'd go 100% no fault, which means no one would have the right to sue at all. And we just felt like that was too much change for this market.
So, to be clear, Danielle Smith acknowledges that she received recommendations that the province of Alberta should go ahead with a public insurance option for Albertans because it would save Albertans money. It would address the cost of living crisis that Albertans are facing. One can only assume that report factored in the cost of setting up the new Crown Corporation and the benefit. And Danielle Smith doesn't say, hey, the report said we should do this. We should totally do this because it would make Albertans' lives a whole lot better. But we would end up losing some taxpayers' money on it. She doesn't say that. What she said was it would be too much change for the market. So again, it's very, very clear what the priorities are. It's not Albertans. It's the corporations. And that's something that becomes, with all of the contract negotiations that are going on, it becomes painfully clear. Danielle Smith is willing to bend over backwards to make sure that corporations get all of the breaks they need. She's letting AI data centers write off all of their computers against their taxes. She's made massive changes to the laws to allow for coal mining in the eastern slopes. She's protected insurance companies instead of doing what many other provinces already do in ways that would benefit Albertans. The priorities are very, very clear. And it's really unfortunate. And it's something that more people should be aware of. Moving on from there, we got to talk. Oh, boy. You take 1 week off with plague. And all of these things happen. Because we got to talk about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, there is some important background and context that we have to set before we get too far into things, because there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of people who believe a lot of false things about the next topic, which is going to be the notwithstanding clause. You see it all the time in Alberta. People are like, they should use the notwithstanding clause to get us a pipeline, or they should use the notwithstanding clause to get us all free bags of chips every second Tuesday. I don't know. It seems like there's a perception that the notwithstanding clause can be used as a get out of jail free card for just about anything that a provincial government wants to do. But it's really, really important, especially given current goings on in the province of Alberta, what the notwithstanding clause actually is and what it actually does. So tonight, we're going to take a look at that. To start with, when we're talking about the notwithstanding clause, we are talking about Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And yup, I'm going to read it to you. Section 33 states, Parliament or the legislature of a province may expressly declare in an act of Parliament or the legislature, as the case may be, that the act or a provision thereof shall operate notwithstanding a provision included in sections 2 or sections 7 through 15 of the Charter. So, what Section 33 is saying in the first little bit there is that, because in some provinces they call their legislatures provincial parliaments, a provincial governing body can say, we're going to use Section 33, and it's going to allow us to make a law that's going to be a law, even though it violates potentially the rights that are enumerated in sections 2 or sections 7 through 15 of the Charter. And we're going to talk about what those sections are in just a sec, but we're going to finish going all the way through the notwithstanding clause. An act or a provision of an act in respect of which a declaration made under this section is in effect shall have such operation as it would have but for the provision of the Charter referred in this declaration. A declaration made under subsection 1 shall cease to have effect 5 years after it comes into force or on such earlier date as may be specified in the declaration. Parliament or the legislature of a province may reenact a declaration under subsection 1. So basically what that whole chunk means is that once a provincial government has said, we've got this law that we like this law, and it's totally going to violate sections 2 or 7 through 15 of the Charter, but we really, really like it, and we want to do it, even though it's violating Charter rights. So we're going to invoke Section 33 as part of the legislation, and they get to have that law be on the books for 5 years. After that 5-year period, they have the option of re-upping, re-invoking, and there's no endpoint that exists with this mechanism. So if you wanted to have a government re-up a law every 5 years for the next ever, you could theoretically do that. But the reason why this section was included in the Charter is because you're violating Charter rights. And that's not something that should be taken lightly. That's something that should only be done under extraordinarily dire circumstances. I don't know, like, say, maybe a pandemic. And that should only be in effect for the very minimum amount of time required. So the idea of violating Charter rights is a huge deal. And the idea behind including this is that given that it's such a nuclear option, given that the government that decided to invoke Section 33 would have to wear the fact that they decided to violate Charter rights, that would be their brand. It would mean that it wouldn't be something that they would do willy-nilly. It would only be for the most extreme circumstances because they would have to face public opinion. And that's why the 5-year piece exists, because that's the longest that you can go in Canada without having an election. But for one election cycle, whoever is targeted by that legislation gets their charter rights suspended. Now let's talk about what the sections in particular that we're talking about actually are. Section 2, fundamental freedoms. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion. Oh, I just Dandy Williams that. I'm looking forward to the DMs on that one. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. So that is the first chunk of rights that the government can say you don't get to do those things anymore under Section 33 for a period of 5 years. Now, Section 7 through 15 are considerably longer. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of person, the right to not be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the provincial principles of fundamental justice. Everybody has the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. Everyone has the right to not be arbitrarily detained. There's a whole bunch in here. But the big one that becomes pertinent to the conversation is Section 15 under equality rights. Every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular, without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. Subsection 1 does not preclude any law, program, or activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups, including those that are disadvantaged because of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. So, the easiest way to explain sections 2 and 7 through 15 is those are all of the individual rights that are protected under the Charter. One of the questions that's come up is, why does Section 33 only apply to those provisions? And if you take a look at the history of it, it actually has to do with the fact that prior to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, those rights weren't explicitly spelled out. And so one of the justifications for including the notwithstanding clause is these are new rights in 1982. We need to see how it's going to sort itself out. We maybe need to give provinces a little while to sort things out, but it was never intended for social engineering. And there's probably a very compelling argument to be made that 1982 rights aren't new rights anymore. I mean, it's not a super new document, but it's by no means the newest one that goes on. So this is all the background of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the notwithstanding clause. And I'm looking forward to getting all of the DMs from lawyers telling me that I've just done a big thing badly. If there are any major corrections that need to be issued, we will issue them next episode. But there's a big conversation that's going on in Canada right now about the notwithstanding clause, and it has a lot to do with a Quebec bill called Bill 21. And this is in many ways a problematic bill because it argues for secularism in Quebec, which means you cannot work in any public-facing government capacity if you are wearing anything that has anything to do with any kind of faith. So if you're wearing a hijab or niqab, you can't be in a public-facing government role. You can't be a cop. You can't be a crown lawyer. You can't work on government contracts. If you are a Hasidic Jew, you cannot wear the clothing of your faith and have these government roles. And there's a lot of people that are making the argument that is profoundly an overreach. And there are conversations that are going on in the country right now in regards to should there be limitations on the notwithstanding clause, because it seems like there are certain governments that are getting much more comfortable saying, you know what? We're just going to use the notwithstanding clause to get whatever we want and punch down on certain groups without any regard for the consequence. And in certain provinces, you can kind of sort of get away with that a little bit. Quebec's law has been controversial, but it does have majority support. And this is where it gets particularly problematic, because if you're governing only by popular opinion, then we run into something called the tyranny of the masses. And this is the idea that if you get enough like-minded people together, they can make very bad decisions that hurt other people together. And there's a very real argument to be made that in the presence of real leadership, that shouldn't be a problem, because real leaders should be going out of their way to bring people along. They should be trying to find solutions that work for everybody to move a society forward. But every once in a while, you get a leader that decides to get in front of whatever parade has already been started and just keep doing what the rest of them are doing. And this brings us to how this is pertinent for the province of Alberta right now. Because on September 17th, Andrew Boychenko, who is the Minister of Tourism and Sport, was issued a mandate letter. And in this mandate letter, which is basically the instructions for here's what I want you to do as the premier of Alberta, here's what your job is. Go do these things now, do them. And in that mandate letter, one of the things that Andrew Boychenko has been tasked with doing is ensuring the full implementation of the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act using all legal and constitutional means necessary. Now, many people immediately heard that and went, whoa, 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 whoa. If we're going to say ensure the full implementation of the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act using all available legal and constitutional means necessary, Danielle Smith has just put Section 33 of the notwithstanding clause in play. Now, she has said before on a number of issues, both that she would not use the notwithstanding clause and that she will. One of the other ones, many people are expecting to see it coming this fall with a new legislative session, has to do with the forced treatment. Because there are many people who have said forcing people into treatment would be a violation of their charter rights. Danielle Smith's on the record saying, well, if we have to do the notwithstanding clause, that's what we'll do. Now we've got a mandate letter in regards to the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act that says use all constitutional means necessary. And the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act is the one that was particularly controversial because it is the one that hits on a lot of the limitations for trans folks and for intersex folks competing in sports. We've talked about it a lot on the show. And there's some pieces here that are really, really important to highlight. One of them is that it didn't take very long for the Canadian Medical Association to issue a call to refrain from not using the notwithstanding clause to interfere with patient care because everybody could see the direction that it was going. If she was going to use the notwithstanding clause, the nuclear constitutional option that is supposed to be a deterrent, not a lever to pull on willy-nilly. If she was going to use that, she was probably going to use it for all of the other anti-trans things that she's pushing on. And it didn't take very long before that came out, because in a leaked memo, it was made clear that Danielle Smith was going to consider using the notwithstanding clause to make sure that her non-evidence-based policies on gender-affirming care in Alberta, which have already had an injunction placed on them by a judge because the judge determined that putting them in effect immediately would cause irreparable harm to vulnerable youth. Yeah, we'll do the notwithstanding clause on those as well. Here's what Smith had to say about that leaked memo.
A new position, a leaked memo, says your office is preparing to use the notwithstanding clause to amend 3 transgender laws covering pronoun and name changes in schools, participation in female sports, and restrictions on puberty blockers or other care. Why is this necessary to go the notwithstanding clause route, and doesn't it override rights?
Well, first of all, it's a leaked memo, so obviously it's an internal discussion document, and somebody's upset about it, and so they're trying to make a media story out of it. I have said that we believe that our laws can be defended in court on the grounds of Section 1, which is reasonable. I think if it's reasonable, if it's evidence-based, that we can make the case that we shouldn't be doing medical interventions on children that will sterilize them. It just seems so obvious to me that is the case, and that is ultimately what the courts will decide. So I'm prepared to go to court and battle that out. I think we need to. But if it turns out that the court process may take years and years and years to resolve, then we may have to take that measure in order to protect kids. So that's what we're getting our internal lawyers to have a look at, is what is the time frame of what it would look like to go through the court process at all of the different levels versus what it would do to be able to protect kids today. And we haven't made a decision yet, but that's the conversation that we're having.
All right. Should you decide to go that route, would it not override rights?
Well, I think a child has a right to be able to make a decision as an adult on whether they want to have children. I mean, I strongly believe that there's certain decisions that can only be made by a person. And if we don't think a 10-year-old can decide to sign a contract, to smoke, to join the army, to do drugs, to be truant from school, then they can't decide whether or not they want to have babies as an adult. You have to wait until you're an adult to make those decisions. And puberty blockers, by definition, stop the process of sexual maturity. And it means that you're sterilizing children, and we're not going to do it.
It is incredibly difficult to hear the Premier of Alberta say that puberty blockers sterilize children. That is false on so many levels. And it didn't take very long before the pediatrics chair called out Danielle Smith. And I want to read the full statement here because I think that it's really important. This is Dr. Sam Wong, president of the association's pediatric session. Puberty blockers don't render a person infertile or sterile. That is not true. To say that they're sterile is a gross overstatement because you would never say that a 6-year-old is sterile because they can't have children. Maybe Smith should get her facts straight, be less condescending. Wong said that he's surprised the premier made the claim again Wednesday because she has been corrected before. It's such a falsehood and a misnomer. It's incredible. It's quite incredible that she can get away with saying that. I don't know where she's getting her medical information from, but the way that she's stating it is not true. This was echoed by multiple high-profile physicians. Dr. Paul Parks, we've got coming up on an episode, by the way, said that he knows firsthand that Smith has been briefed. She has been told that puberty blockers do not cause sterility. They pause puberty. And when you stop taking puberty blockers, puberty starts up again. The big value for puberty blockers for kids who are receiving or youth who are receiving gender affirming care is that it prevents all of the major physiological changes that happen, which means that if they decide down the road after the age of 18, because that's how old you have to be in order to get surgeries, if they decide down the road that they do want to commit to surgeries, it's less surgery required. It also means that it's easier for them to present as their gender because they don't go through all of the voice changes and everything else that happens. But that's the truth. And it's horrifying that Danielle Smith knows. She has been told by experts, but she believes she knows better. And you heard her in that clip. Well, if we have to violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, here's what I believe rights are. She believes that her personal opinion trumps the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's something that all Albertans, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, should be paying very, very, very close attention to because it's absolutely horrifying. But that's not even where it stops, because Demetrius Nicolaides got himself a new bill as well, new mandate letter, and in it, Danielle Smith was very clear that she wants to protect children, even though experts have said the policies in Bill 27. This is the parental notification on any sort of pronoun changes or name changes. This is all of the changes to sexual education that put up barriers to entry that experts have resoundingly said are going to result in higher rates of sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy in youth. Protect children by ensuring full implementation of Bill 27 using all available legal and constitutional means necessary. So let's be clear. Danielle Smith is saying, I will use the notwithstanding clause because I don't believe that we should sterilize children. But she's also saying, I will use the notwithstanding clause to make sure that vulnerable kids get out it. I will use the notwithstanding clause to make sure that it's harder for kids to access sex education. So it's not just about protecting kids from being sterilized, which they aren't. It's about her getting her way. And when a provincial leader goes down the road of saying, if I can't get my way on my socially engineered policies, then I'm just going to invoke the notwithstanding clause. Again, that's something every Albertan should be paying attention to. And I want to address one other thing really quickly before we move on to the remainder of the show, of which there is still plenty, because I decided to get sick last week. One of the counter arguments that has been launched, which is not true, it does not hold the water that it claims to, is, well, if a kid starts on puberty blockers, it's pretty much a guarantee that they're going to go on to the hormone replacement therapy, and then it's pretty much a guarantee that they're going to get all the surgeries done, and at that point they're sterile. So yeah, puberty blockers cause sterility because they're the first step on a dark path towards sterilization, which again, you cannot get the surgeries in Canada under the age of 18. There is nuance to be had here. And there are real conversations to be had about making sure that kids who are navigating gender dysphoria get all of the supports that they need and deserve, so that if they start on the road of gender affirming care with the support and permission from their parents, which is how it works now, if they start on that road, they get to define what the endpoint is. And there's no doubt that there will be some youth who start getting gender affirming care, and then they maybe decide, you know what, I don't want to get the surgery. Not yet. I want to do the puberty blockers and the hormone replacement therapy, but maybe I do want to have reproductive options down the road. So I'm going to hold off on those things. And they should be given all of the supports that they need to make those decisions with their parents while it's appropriate, and then on their own. But those decisions should not be made by a premier or an elected official who has no background in medicine or endocrinology or psychology or psychiatry. They should be made by the qualified professionals. So if we want to have a conversation about increasing supports so that any decisions that are made as youth navigate their way along that continuum of care, I don't think that you'll find anybody in the trans community who's going to say, no, what we need is less supports. We need less supports. That's just not a thing that's going to happen. But that's not what the Premier of Alberta is arguing for. She's arguing for revoking people's charter rights. Period. And you're going to hear me repeat that a lot over the coming weeks and months, because it needs to be said and it needs to be understood. And it needs to be made patently clear that she's doing so based on lies. Puberty blockers do not sterilize children, period. All of the experts, the chair, again, of the pediatrics section says that's not true. Many doctors, as again, stepped up and said that's not true. So Danielle Smith is willing to revoke people's charter rights based on a lie. That needs to be understood. Moving on from there. There was some more stuff that happened on your province, your premier, and this is my new favorite graphic for the show, because I just think it's just so very, very, very on point. She had some thoughts on the federal pharmacare program as well.
Will Alberta be opting into the new pharmacare plan being implemented by the federal government? It seems when these programs are introduced by the federal government, they are always poorly managed and planned, and also very expensive, that conflict with existing provincial plans.
I know that there's this mythology that the federal government is offering a 100% of drugs covered 100% of the time at $1. It's not true. I wish that people would take a look at the plan. They are essentially covering two types of ailments. They're covering diabetes and they're covering birth control. So if you don't have diabetes and you don't need birth control, the federal pharmacare plan does nothing for you. Meanwhile, we have multiple different provincial pharmacare programs. I think we're in the process of trying to rename it so people understand we do have a pharmacare program. We cover pharmacare for those who are ACE recipients. We have a special seniors pharmacare program for those over age 65. We have a special non-group pharmacare program for those who don't have their employer covering it. And we also use Blue Cross for all of our employee groups as well. And no, we're not ending all of those programs so that the federal government can only cover your birth control and your diabetes. We're not going to do it. So that's the problem that we have, is that it is not comprehensive. It is not from $1. They've raised expectations about what it is, and we are going to make sure that we continue to support people on the programs that they actually need and the care that they actually need with the programs that we have.
No. That's just not true. The federal government was very, very clear when they announced the first step of the National Pharmacare Program that this is only step one. And if anybody believes that the federal government has said that they're going to cover 100% of all medications across the board, they are the victims of misinformation that maybe came from, I don't know, maybe the premier's office, but it's simply not true. And the vast majority of people are aware of that. But Danielle Smith continues to try to say, oh, people think it's going to be 100%, but it's not going to be 100%. And people are they're going to be so disappointed. And I'm not going to cancel people's drug programs. As we have established on the episode that we did, where we did the FOIP, and we asked, what the hell was LaGrange talking about when she said that these programs would need to be canceled? The only reason why any drug programs would need to be canceled was because Danielle Smith says so. That's it. There's no requirement of the federal program to cancel existing pharmacare programs. It's just not a thing that exists. If anything, the federal program would save Albertan taxpayers money, because for those people who are on those provincial programs and who do need diabetic medications or birth control medications for a lot of different reasons, which aren't necessarily birth control, by the way, that would be something that would be paid for by the federal government, not the provincial government. That still sounds like a win. But Danielle Smith does not want to give the federal government any wins whatsoever. But that's not the only bonkers clip that came up. Remember how we started off? We were talking about the driver's licenses and Danielle Smith being so concerned about election integrity, and how we talked about the importance. If we're going to talk about the integrity of our elections, we need to make sure that we're having honest conversations that are based in facts. Don't know what made me think of that.
Electronic tabulators for elections. You're not in favor of those. City of Calgary said, look, if we're not going to be using those for this next municipal election, it's going to cost an added, I think the amount was $250 million or something. I can't remember. Maybe I'm off on that amount, but it's an extra cost. Plus, they're going to have to hire more people to do all the ballot counting.
Democracy costs money. It does. And you know what? The federal government somehow managed to muddle through having a nationwide election without using tabulators. So we're just doing what we've heard people want us to do, is let's go back to counting ballots the traditional way. And there's good reason for that, because when you have a very, very close vote, you need to be able to see the paper ballots so that you're able to do a recount. In most ridings, one candidate is well ahead of the other, and so it's immaterial. But where it really matters is when you end up with votes of 1 or 10 or 100 separating the top guys, and they need to be able to have the paper ballots in front of them so that they can do a recount efficiently. You just can't do that with tabulators. So I'm sure that we will find a solution. I'm sure we will. I'm encouraging everybody to get out there and do your civic duty. If you have the ability to get trained up as a poll worker so that you can help with the count, please do, because we're going to do the same thing provincially as well.
So there's some numbers that need to be corrected there. It's not 250 million. Best estimates are it's going to be roughly $3.3 million, which is still a lot of money. And as Danielle Smith talks about all of the things that we simply cannot afford to do, it's bonkers that she would, and that's just Calgary, by the way. Edmonton's going to have their own costs as well. It's bonkers that she's willing to say, we're going to spend millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on getting rid of tabulators. But there's a more insidious piece to it as well, because she starts by recognizing that we're talking about the tabulation, the vote counting. And then she pivots to the whole paper ballots bullshit. And let's be clear, it's absolutely bullshit. Tabulators are not electronic voting machines. They count the votes that have been cast, and they save a lot of money in doing so. And her whole spiel about, well, you know, if there's like a really, really close election, we need to make sure that we've got those paper ballots that could be counted. We do. Anybody who was present in the last provincial election knows that there were multiple constituencies, multiple races that had recounts that were wafer thin margins. And they were able to do those recounts because they still had paper ballots. Nobody is advocating, seriously, for the use of electronic voting machines. Nobody is saying that we should be going to a system where there's not a paper record of how each individual person cast their vote. The only question is, how quickly would we like those votes counted, and how much money can we save by doing things that way? And it turns out in the city of Calgary, at least $3.3 million. But that democracy costs money. We can't pay for teachers to have the salaries they deserve. We can't pay for students to have the supports they deserve. We can't pay for insurance systems that would save Albertans money in a very, very real way, when cost of living is the number one concern on Albertans' minds. But the tabulators, if it costs 10, 15, 20 million across the province, that's worth it, because David Parker got really upset about vote tabulators this one time, and this is where she's committed to. But also came up the question of the COVID shots.
Please ask the Premier if the fall flu shot will be treated the same as COVID shots.
You know, the flu shot has a different recommendation profile. COVID is recommended for those over 65 with pre-existing conditions, as well as those who are immunocompromised over age 6 months. And so that's what COVID is. The flu is very different because it can impact the very young and the very old equally. And so the recommendation from the medical establishment is to make it available. So that's what we're going to do. RSV as well as one where we know that particularly over the age of 75 are most at risk. So we've made it available to those at age 75. And that's how we do our assessment, is what is the group that is most at risk? Let's make it available for them. But then you can also pay out of pocket if you want some peace of mind.
Again, she's lying. To claim that Alberta's COVID vaccine policy is in some way informed by the evidence is easily, patently false. When she first rolled out the policy, no healthcare workers. Now, she started to backtrack on that through the contract negotiations, where people who are in roles that were considered essential during the pandemic, people who still had to go to work during the pandemic, who were at the highest risk because of the types of exposure that they were getting. One would think it would be a very easy thing to say, hey, if somebody was one of those essential workers, whether it's a physician or nurse or a grocery store clerk or anybody who's in any of those public-facing roles, if they want to get the COVID shot for free, they can get the COVID shot for free. That would be fantastic. They didn't do that. And it's not in line with what the recommendations are. The NACI recommendations are very, very clear. They recommend, especially for certain vulnerable groups, but they also recommend everybody who is medically safe to do so. And there are some people for whom the shots are not available for them. But if in consultation with somebody's physician, the physician says, yeah, you should get it. The NACI recommendations are that those people also everyone get COVID shots. And the real proof to show how much of a dumpster fire the UCP's COVID shot policy building has been is, let's all remember, there was a period of like 2 weeks where the UCP's published policies said kids 6 months to 12 years old couldn't get COVID shots, which flies in the face of the recommendations. So it's just more Danielle Smith cant truth on demand whatsoever. But there's one other clip that I want to play here because, and again, this is probably where I got to do I'm speaking only for myself and not for any companies that employ me or organizations I may or may not be affiliated with. But a paramedic called in to your province, your premier, and he brought receipts. And he was respectful. And the answer that Danielle Smith gave, I'll let you hear.
Right now, we're the lowest paid paramedics in Canada. You got us out of the hallways when you got elected. We're back parked in the hallways again. We're in chronic red alerts. Sometimes on night shifts, only 61% of our staff come in. We're having staff retention problems. We have the highest book-off rate in the health sciences portfolio. AHS took away our supplementary pensions when we came over from the city of Calgary. And as a thank you, AHS, after 37 years of work, gave me a $25 certificate. So that's 71 cents a year for being a loyal employee. So I'm asking, can you advocate for the paramedics? We're probably going to be taking a strike vote soon.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I'm a big fan of yours. Maybe where we could find money for the contract is there's a lot of fat severance packages with our AHS managers. And you yourself have said that, we have, AHS has a lot of managers. So anyhow, I support you, and I hope you support your paramedics.
Thanks so much for that, John. I have a very dear friend who is a paramedic who has been giving me a blow-by-blow of where things have improved and then where they have regressed. So part of the solution to that is we've created a new specialized emergency or EMS oversight so that the people making the decisions are making them in the interest of what paramedics need. So this new oversight just came in place, I believe, September the 1st. And we're going to work through all of the issues that were identified in a previous report. Part of what we had seen is that ambulances are being treated like an extension of hallway medicine. And so if you have people who are in long-term care patients who are in acute care beds, then that prevents us from being able to move emergency patients into those beds. And then when the emergency beds fill up, then the hallways fill up. And then when the hallways fill up, they just keep parking ambulances. So the solution is we've got to get those alternative level of care patients out. We're about to start into a real effort on some specific hospitals to figure out how to do this efficiently. We have just started focusing in on the patients that were in hospital over 300 days. Imagine that. Like, we had people who were living in hospital for over 300 days. There were 7 in particular who'd been in hospital for a combined 18 years. We found an appropriate place for them. And now we're going to make sure everyone who's been in the hospital over 300 days has an efficient way to move out. And then we'll go to 200 days, and then we'll go to 100 days. And by doing so, we hope to get that 1,700 alternative level of care patients that we know we have in hospitals out so that we can start moving the patient flow. It's taken a lot longer than I wanted to get here. It took a lot of sort of structural change to get there, but we're there right now, and I'm with you. The other thing I should just say about bargaining, because I know, unfortunately, HSAA also didn't accept our most recent proposal. It was about a 60-40 split, and so I know that there are some people happy and some that are not. But one of the processes is is for us to do market adjustments. If we have a particular employee group that is not being paid fair, like the same relative to sort of that Western average, then there is room for an adjustment. So I would just encourage John to go and have a look at what that looks like, because we've been very surgical, especially with HSAA. There's about 150 different professions that they represent, paramedics being one of them. And so I hope we've got that right, but have a look at what the most recent proposal was, and because if we can get that passed, it should be able to address a lot of the things that you've identified.
So let's be clear. Let's be really clear. Let's recap what it was that paramedic John called in about to your province, your premier, and expressed his concerns about. He was concerned about the working conditions. He was concerned about the issues of morale, which in turn are causing the highest rates of book-offs, which is when somebody says, I'm not coming into work, I need a day, and burnout, which is where somebody is so morally injured by the job that they cannot come to work anymore, and staff retention. He talked about the fact that paramedics in Alberta are the lowest paid in Canada. Now, full disclosure, I work as a paramedic in Alberta, so I don't disagree with anything that John said there, speaking only for myself. But it's really important to notice that he talked about working conditions, he talked about morale, he talked about staff retention, he talked about book-offs, he talked about burnout, he talked about pay. And Danielle Smith's response was, we're going to do things inside of healthcare, and you should have taken that contract offer. The contract offer that was put on the table was rejected in a historic way from the people of HSAA. And to suggest that the small, not even up with inflation, raises that were offered in that contract, which are commensurate what they're offering teachers and what they're offering everybody, 3% over 4 years. Doesn't matter how far behind you've fallen over the last however many years. That's what they're offering everybody. Those things, those small raises that don't even keep up with inflation, don't even keep up with the cost of insurance. I can put that graph back up on the screen. That's not going to address any of those issues. And this is, again, the problem. Danielle Smith was out of her depth. And so instead of answering the question that she was asked, she went to one of the talking points that she's got stored away in her mental Rolodex. And that's what she ran with. And that brings us to almost our very last section. And then we have a couple of announcements, fun stuffs. And we're going to give full disclosure as well on this. We stole this. This is the NDP's graphic. They made this graphic. So if anybody wants to sue anybody, you should probably talk to the NDP about that graphic. Not saying, just saying. Because the CorruptCare crisis, the scandal, it made its way back into the news again this week, and it made its way in for a couple of different reasons. One of the first reasons everybody was expecting, there's a report that's due from Judge Wyant, who is a Saskatchewan judge who was tasked with looking into AHS procurement to see, hey, were there problems with the procurement stuffs? Now, it's really important to highlight, and we're going to in just a sec, the scope of the report is really quite limited from the good judge. It's also important to highlight there's already been some problems because it was due back in, I think it was May, and it's now almost October. And he was supposed to have the interim report ready for delivery, which Danielle Smith has always said it's going to be available to the public on Wednesday. And the NDP we're moderately excited about the report. They issued this release very early in the morning on September 24th. Today, Albertans should be receiving Judge Wyant's delayed interim report into the CorruptCare scandal. On March 10th, Minister of Justice Mickey Amery committed in Alberta legislature that Judge Wyant's interim report would be posted on alberta.ca as soon as it is complete. Although we have a little faith in this carefully constructed report, we hope the minister holds to his commitment. While we appreciate the work that the retired justice has done, we will not be surprised if this report, with every last detail controlled by the same people implicated in the scandal, ends up being a total whitewash of the government. So, a couple of really important details to pull out of that statement. Mickey Amery said in the legislature that the interim report would be available on alberta.ca. It was due on Wednesday. And as it became very, very clear, it was not coming. Sean Amato, who's a journalist who does the Alberta Politics thing. He's very, very good. If you don't follow him, you should. An interim report on the AHS contract scandal that was due today is still not done. A government spokesman has confirmed. This was at 11:39 on the 24th. The public will not get to look at any of the reports until October 15th at the earliest. And then the statement from the spokesperson, Judge Wyant is wrapping up interviews and his interim report is expected in the coming days. The government is expecting the final report on October 15th with public release to follow. Given that this matter is still currently under investigation, no further comment can be provided at this time. Now, this is an important shift. Mickey Amery, he's in the legislature. He says, yeah, the interim report, it'll go up. Everybody gets to see it. We're all about transparency. And now, never mind. We're going to just keep that interim report to ourselves, and then the public will get the final one. And the NDP, they did not like that one bit. Christina Gray issued a second statement. It is incredibly disappointing, but sadly not surprising to see the UCP government has once again delayed their own carefully crafted report into the CorruptCare allegations plaguing their government. These endlessly sliding deadlines for Judge Wyant's report are yet another reason Alberta needs a real public inquiry into these matters. This UCP government cannot be trusted to investigate itself, and the repeated delays just reinforce how ridiculous this pretend inquiry is. So that's the Judge Wyant report, which, as we're going to discuss, is one of many reports that are confusing the situation. We're going to try to sort it out just a little bit, maybe provide a little bit of clarity. But that's not all that happened, because on the same day, Carrie Tate released another story on the CorruptCare scandal. And I'm going to read from the story. These are the words of the story. These are not my words, to be clear. A consultant advising Alberta Health Authority on its use of private surgical centers simultaneously worked for a company vying for a contract to operate such a facility, according to a confidential report obtained by the Globe and Mail. Jitendra Prasad, a former procurement official with Alberta Health Services, represented Alberta's surgical group in negotiations with the Health Authority in the summer of 2022, while he was paid by AHS to advise it about contracting with such private providers. So according to the Globe story, Jitendra Prasad was contracted to represent Alberta Surgical Group in negotiations with AHS at the same time as he was contracted with AHS to advise who should be getting contracts on chartered surgical contracts. If it seems like a conflict of interest, it might be. I don't know. But that's not all the story had to say. The story also, during negotiations, Mr. Iskew, this is a different individual, Mr. Blaine Iskew, who previously reported to Mr. Prasad at Alberta Health Services, represented the health authority according to the report. He argued in favor of compensation terms that alarmed his public service colleagues, the report said. Alberta Surgical Group, for example, pushed for a 10% administration fee on top of the cost for surgical implants. One colleague told Mr. Iskew and others that fee was unnecessary because it should have been factored into the company's overall costs, the report states. However, Mr. Iskew, quote, disregarded his colleagues' feedback, end quote, when on October 25th, 2022, he told his boss that Alberta Health Services would agree to the fee, the report states. So, there's some moving pieces here. Now, it's important to highlight that there are different degrees of questions that many people are asking in regards to this situation. Because on one hand, that seems weird. On the other hand, there's nothing in the story or the referenced in the story by Carrie Tate that says that anything explicitly illegal was happening in that report. Now, this is where things get complicated, and we have to do a little bit of background because, according to the story, this report that they're talking about is a report by BLG. And in order to get some context for the timelines, we're going to now refer word for word to the sworn affidavit of former AHS CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos. Ms. Mentzelopoulos initiated the 2024 review after identifying what she considered abnormalities in an Alberta Surgical Group's contract. The Health Authority commissioned law firm Borden, this is from the Globe story. We'll get to the statement in a sec. The Health Authority commissioned law firm Borden, Ladner, Gervais, so BLG, to investigate, and its mandate expanded to other deals, including private surgical centers in Red Deer and Lethbridge, as well as a $70 million agreement with MHCare Medical Corp to supply children's pain medication. And I suppose this is where I have to say, yes, that's the same MHCare Medical that's suing me and the Breakdown for $6 million for the coverage that we have done on the Turkish acetaminophen, because it's not Tylenol. It's not. It's acetaminophen and ibuprofen. But yeah, that lawsuit's still ongoing. A lot of people seem to think that it's wrapped up. It's definitely not. It's just moving very, very slow. So there's your little lawsuit update. All of that being said, now let's go to the affidavit from the CEO, the former CEO. The October minister's directive was received in the same time frame as the first draft of the ASG contract review. This work was contracted by AHS to Borden, Ladner, Gervais, BLG as investigators. As described below, they were retained and resources added when the investigation later expanded. The first draft of the report did not address conflict of interest evidence that had been provided by AHS employees to the investigators, and those employees told me they were concerned about gaffes in the draft report. One employee wrote that he was troubled by it, and there was a perception both within and outside of AHS procurement that as long as you, air quote, followed process, you could cross any moral or ethical or conflict of interest line. AHS employees said that they had been considering a formal whistleblower complaint, but hoped that the draft report could be revisited. They sent me the same information about linkages between Mr. Prasad, Mr. Iskew, and ASG that had been provided to the investigators. While there seemed to be little use in continuing to analyze rates given the minister's directive, I agreed that the investigators should be asked to revisit their report and review conflict of interest. A briefing note prepared on October 25th, 2024 about the contract's extension for ASG noted that PSOS, which is the procurement folks, led the negotiations, that the extension would create a $5.75 million budget shortfall, and that Alberta Health, not AHS, provided direction on term, pricing, and volumes. So let's be very, very clear. What that section of the affidavit of the former CEO of AHS seems to identify is that there was a first version of the BLG report. The people who were involved in that report were, quote, troubled by it and considered filing whistleblower complaints because they felt that the first version of the BLG report didn't adequately represent their concerns and all of the relevant information. That just seems to be something that's worth highlighting. There's some other stuff that's worth highlighting too. The independent investigation and forensic audit that was commenced in November 2024 was contracted to BLG and PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. The terms of reference were developed by AHS to address purchasing and procurement involving particular individuals. Not all of these individuals were implicated in every aspect of the investigation, but there was overlap. From my notes, the terms of reference included analyzing the draft media response that had been prepared in response to questions about AHS procurement with MHCare and related companies to assess its validity and understand if it was written to obfuscate facts, reviewing procurement with these companies, continuing to review the 2022 ASG Edmonton contract, reviewing procurement processes for the proposed CSFs in Red Deer and Lethbridge, and analyzing conflict of interests among individuals and proponents involved in these activities and processes to understand if there was personal gain. So, we have the first draft of the report. And then there was a second investigation that was launched by the AHS CEO in November of 2024 that was contracted to BLG, and then PricewaterhouseCoopers was, I believe PricewaterhouseCoopers was subcontracted. But there's more. The questions we had for CSF proponents in Red Deer and Lethbridge were prepared by the independent investigators and reflected where they were at in their work. The investigators told us they had reached the point where the next logical step was to ask the CSF Chartered Surgical Facility proponents themselves for disclosure as a basis for restarting negotiations. The questions were meant to explore issues like whether specified businesses were legal entities, who were the shareholders of various entities and numbered companies, any changes to the RFP interested parties between September 7th, 2022 and present, and anything of value provided to any employee consultant by the RFP interested companies. And in the CEO's affidavit, she included the draft letter that was going to be sent, was planned to be sent by Michael Lamb, who is the interim vice president, corporate services, and chief financial officer. Now, to be clear, this is a draft of the letter. And this is the letter that she's referring to in her affidavit. So this letter has all of the questions. And it's fascinating because these questions also include the number of companies that we originally broke the story of back in October as being companies that there was a lot of familiar names in. So there's a lot going on here. If you want, you can, we've posted this on our socials as well. But if you want, you can take a pause, as they say on the TikToks, I believe. So we have the first report. They were not happy with the results of the first report. It did not dig into the conflict of interests concerns to the satisfaction of several of the people who contributed to the report, as well as apparently to the former AHS CEO. There was a second investigation and report that was commissioned. That second report and investigation found enough that they decided to draft a letter to send to the surgical companies to say, hey, we have a lot of questions. We would really like answers to these questions. What happened? Well, there's a reason why I'm saying that the letter was drafted and never sent. Because also, from the affidavit, because Alberta Health wanted the Chartered Surgical Facility negotiations to proceed immediately, my colleagues and I were anxious to get approval for the disclosure letter from Alberta Health, given it provided the basis to re-engage with proponents. On December 19th at 16:25, that's 4:25 p.m., a colleague answered the question of whether there had been any updates from Alberta Health. No. Last I heard, Alberta Health was meeting about the letter at 2:30, but I haven't received anything from Christine since then. At around 6:14 p.m., my colleague asked me to jump onto a meeting where they advised me that Alberta Health had given instructions that we were not allowed to send the letter. At the same time, I learned coincidentally from a colleague in government that the 2:30 meeting had been between Mr. Tremblay and staff from the Premier's office. I had the following text exchange with Mr. Tremblay on December 19th and 20th, 2024. Athana, December 19th at 7:10. Hi, Andre. Sorry to bother. I understand we are on hold with letter ownership, etc. to the multimodal proponents. I'm wondering if there's any context or insight you can share so that I have a sense of next steps. Mr. Tremblay, hi, Athana. Can we discuss tomorrow? Athana, sure. Is there a good time for me to call? Mr. Tremblay, between 8 and 9 would work. Athana, will do. Thanks. Mr. Tremblay, December 20th at 7:39 in the morning. Can we delay our chat this morning? I need to gather some additional information. Athana, sure. Let me know when is a good time to connect later today. I did not hear back from Mr. Tremblay about the CSF letter. So, according to the affidavit, the sworn affidavit from the former AHS CEO, to recap again, I'm going to be repetitive here. There was a first report. The first report did not answer all the questions. The people who had contributed to that first report did not like it. They said there's some very big missing pieces here. A second investigation was commissioned using a third party, Pricewaterhouse. That report got to the point where they had whole of the questions that we just had on the screen for the chartered surgical facility proponents. A letter was drafted to ask all of those questions. Allegedly, after a meeting with Tremblay, the deputy minister at the time, and the premier's staff, the decision was made to not send that letter, to not pursue getting those answers. And there's more context that's critically important here. Alberta Health was still considering the CSF letter on December 19th, 2024. On that day, I briefed the AHS board on the internal investigation. By then, I had the benefit of a December 13th, 2024 draft report from our investigators. I had pressured BLG for the report, given the pressure I was feeling from Alberta Health and from Minister Lagrange. Like everything up to that point, this was an iterative process. So each report built on the last. To quickly recap, BLG first reported on their review of the ASG Edmonton contract in October with a draft that did not explore conflict of interest, and they were asked specifically to analyze conflict of interest. In the meantime, BLG was contracted to undertake a broader procurement investigation, so another audit, including a forensic audit for which PwC was contracted, and private investigative capacity. These contracts were undertaken for investigative work and not for legal counsel, although I had directed and was responsible for the independent investigation and met with employees involved in the investigation as well with BLG. I was not involved in that work on a daily basis and did not intend discussions about how the work was being organized. I understood the December 13th report was a penultimate draft on the ASG Edmonton contract, while the broader procurement investigation was still underway, i.e., that there were two somewhat related processes. Given the terms of reference for the letter, there was expected overlap in the work, hence information was produced as part of a forensic audit that was included in the December 13th report. I shared information from that report with the board, who recommended that the procurement investigation be expanded further and that information be shared with the RCMP. I told the board that I felt that we should allow the investigation to complete. The deadline was the end of January 2025, and they would have the opportunity to review the report and give me instructions at that time. I said I had two goals with the independent investigation: to ensure defensible contracts for CSFs and to assess whether we had a basis to seek repayment of the $49.2 million from MHCare. One board member suggested we should be seeking repayment of the full $70 million that was prepaid to MHCare. On December 23rd, 2024, I received an email and letter from Alberta Health Assistant Deputy Minister Chris Nickerson advising me to wind up the AHS independent investigation and transfer all documents to Alberta Health. Ms. Sewell was CC'd on the email, and I corresponded with Mr. Nickerson and Ms. Sewell about the time frame for transferring documents. Ms. Sewell said the first batch should be delivered by January 6, 2025. And then she attached the letter showing that it was Alberta Health. It was the Assistant Deputy Minister for Alberta Health for the Acute Care Division that shut down all of the investigations that were going on with the whole CorruptCare procurement scandal. So, multiple investigations, first draft, first report, not satisfactory. Two other investigations going that apparently were not completed on the order of the government. A letter that the investigators, the independent investigators, wrote all the questions for, never sent on the order of the government. This is where the whole reports confusion needs to be laid to rest. Because the reports that were internal to AHS, there was not just one. There was at least one draft, completed one. There was another draft. And the deadlines for all of the remainder of the reports were the end of January. The CEO of AHS was fired before those reports could be completed, and the government of Alberta asked for, according to her affidavit, all of this is allegedly, the government of Alberta asked for the reports to be shut down and all materials to be transferred to them. So with all of that in mind, it is understandable why it is that the NDP might have some concerns. And you can certainly appreciate how any reasonable Albertan might look at that whole situation and go, oh, I think there's something strange going on there. One can only hope that Judge Wyant, and the reason for those delays is that because Judge Wyant has come to the same conclusion that the AHS CEO came after the first report and said, I think there's some more questions that need to be asked. One can only hope that the judge is doing those things. But the fact that the government has walked back its position that the interim report would be made available to the public and the final report from Judge Wyant would be made available to the public. Well, it seems like for now, the final report's still going to be made available to the public. But there's a lot of commentators that are speculating it's only a matter of time before the UCP and Danielle Smith say, well, given that there's an ethics commissioner investigation and given that there's an RCMP investigation and given that there's all of this litigation that's going on. We heard about this one hack podcaster who's getting sued for $6 million for running his mouth. We don't want to influence unduly any of those processes, so we're not going to be able to release it yet. It's going to go with all of the JFK assassination files, and maybe there's this other group of files that people desperately want released. Maybe we'll put it underneath those in the States when we go down to Mar-a-Lago next. So there's our CorruptCare update. Just a couple other quick points. The legislature is coming back in session, and if you look real closely, it's the yellow blocks that they're working. And if you're looking at that and going, hey, that means they're working like a third of the entire year, you're not wrong, because you can't go on taxpayer paid for Alberta Next junkets when the legislature's in session. You can't go to all these trips down to the States when the legislature's in session. All of the notwithstanding clause stuff that we talked about, that is expected to kick off on the 27th. Now, what's interesting is apparently there's going to be a throne speech on the 23rd, and the 24th. They don't go to work on Fridays. Why would you go to work on a Friday? But there is something happening on the 25th. The live show in Edmonton was so much fun. And the sense of community that we got there was so amazing, and getting to meet everybody with all the Twitter handles was so fantastic. We are doing a Calgary version. We're going to try to hit the major cities once a year, which is really all I have the bandwidth for. But we are going to be in Calgary on October 25th, 2025, from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Cardale Theatre. You can get your tickets at thebreakdownablive.ca. It's the same website address as the Edmonton show. We just changed the referral because we're lazy and we don't know how to make QR codes work, frankly. It's going to be a really good show. We have an amazing panel, and we're going to start announcing some of the panel members later this week. Let me just say, given all of the current events that are going on in the province of Alberta, I am so stoked for the panel that we have put together, the people who have confirmed that they're going to be there, because it is intentionally and unintentionally so topical. It's going to be an amazing night. And I'm really, really excited for it. Tickets are already, I think we're at like 20%, 25% sold out. We did a soft launch last week. And after our patrons had first access to it, we've now opened it up to the public. And I'm going to tell you, these tickets, once we start naming the names, these tickets are going to go fast. So strongly encourage you to get them while you can, because they are already going at a wonderful rate. With that being said, I'm going to do all of the plugs, and then there's one last little housekeeping thing that I want to address. We have our merch. We've teamed up with the amazing folks at Oddities to provide a boatload of different merch options. These are only part of them. You got to scroll down, but it needed to be visible for the screen. You can get the hats, the tank tops, the zip up hoodies. We just got our first shipment that we're going to be sending out to the folks from our first live event at Edmonton. So takes a little bit, but so worth it. The folks at Oddities are doing amazing work. The quality is fantastic. I'm very happy with it. I got like a hoodie and everything myself. And you can get all of that at www.thebreakdownabmerch.ca. So if you want to have the things, you can do it that way. The other thing that I want to just make sure that I hit on is, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, then you can help us produce this kind of content by signing up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set your own value, or you can sign up for one of the pre-prescribed amounts. All of our patrons get the little perks if you've been around for a little bit, but all of our patrons get early access to all of the interviews that we do. And with that, I should do this one first. You can also, if you don't want to do the long-term commitment thing and you don't want the early access to the interviews, because everything goes out public, we're not paywall people. You can also send e-transfers to info@thebreakdownab.ca if you want to help us to continue to do the things in the FOIPs. And we do have a couple of FOIP irons in the fire that we're very excited to be getting shortly. Boy, do we have an interview. If I seem a little punchy tonight, I'm going to tell you why. It's been a very long day. And it's been a long day for a couple of different reasons. I had the privilege of attending a rally today for healthcare. And it was an amazing rally down at Calgary City Hall. A couple of hundred people there. It was really, really good to see people passionate and fired up. So that was fantastic. The other reason why my voice is a little bit extra harsh today is because right before we hopped on for the live show, I did a 2-hour recorded interview with none other than former AMA president, Dr. Paul Parks. And let me tell you, Dr. Paul Parks, if you thought that Dr. Paul Parks, when he was AMA president, was no holds barred, now that he's not, oh, let me tell you. It was an amazing conversation, and I am so excited to be able to bring it to you in short order. Dr. Paul Parks raises the alarm about a whole bunch of healthcare related things that are critically important that people need to be aware of. So look forward to that. Like I said, our patrons will get early access for that. Everybody else will get access to it probably in like a week or so. We'll see. And I want to speak for personally for just a second here. And I want to be clear, this is not performative bullshit. That's not what this next little section is. And then don't worry, I'll play the happy video. It's been a challenging week in healthcare, and it's been a challenging week in the certain communities. And that is because the province of Edmonton, and I would argue Canada, lost an amazing physician to a tragic accident. And you cannot overstate the impact that Dr. Markland had on social media, on the discourse in politics, and in medicine. And the little anecdote that I want to share, which is nothing more than me in a clumsy way trying to pay respect to an incredibly important figure. Is when the breakdown started and we started to build our social media footprint. I've never been one to really care about the metrics of how the show does. I don't put a whole lot of weight or mind into, um, oh, how many people watched this episode, or oh, how many people watched that episode, or how many impressions did our social media get? Because I think a lot of those numbers are artificial, and I think when you start chasing numbers, then you stop chasing the actual conversation, which is the important part. But there were certain people in the social media sphere that were high watermarks for me when I saw that they were engaging with the show, and when they were following the show and engaging in conversations. And so there's some heavy hitter names. The two biggest ones and biggest, I'm speaking in regards to impact, not their social media following. The two biggest ones, Maria Ressa, who's the founder and CEO of Rappler and a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Amazing figure who's been, I've mentioned on the show before, raising the alarm about the state of democracy worldwide. She was one. Dr. Markland was also one. And that's for a lot of different reasons. His interactions were always kind. They were always compassionate. And there is a part of me as a paramedic. Paramedics have strange relationships with physicians because there's always sort of that, they know more than us. And there are certain physicians that are so well credentialed in their, not just their academic credentials, but in how they conduct themselves and with their compassion, that when Dr. Markland would engage with the show and when he would engage with me over social media, I never had the privilege of meeting him in person. It was always very nice. It was always very kind. It was always to the point. And he was a very, very smart doctor. And the Twitter threads that he would post unquestionably have informed how I view certain situations and how I approach situations. And certainly they've informed how I navigate difficult interactions with family members. His loss is a tremendous one. And the fact that there are so many people who have flooded the social media sphere. And I mean, the Prime Minister, oddly not Danielle Smith, who have offered condolences to the family and expressed their admiration for him and what he did. Me saying this is not in any way me trying to hop on any kind of bandwagon. It is merely to try to add my voice to the chorus of those who are grateful for all of the contributions that he brought to the table. And so I want to dedicate this episode of the breakdown to Dr. Markland. That's just a for me thing that I'm doing. And now the funny clip.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
Because, like, Dr. Markland was always funny. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you all so much for choosing to spend a little bit of time with the show. We will be back at some point, assuming I don't get plagued. For sure, the Dr. Paul Parks episode will be going up shortly, and I highly encourage you to check that out. It's going to be a bumpy ride, folks. Danielle Smith is coming with a notwithstanding clause for anything that she thinks the courts might take too long for. We have a premier who's willing to violate human rights based on lies. The legislation session is coming up, and there's going to be all kinds of conversations about forced treatment and God only knows what else. So get ready to get loud. because that's the most important thing. We have to make sure that more and more people are aware of what's going on in the province of Alberta, why it's going on, and what the actual stakes are. So until next time, take care of each other, and please keep the conversation going.